Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery.
Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at a model for organizational agility.
Okay.
And it's called flight levels.
You're right.
So think of it as kind of air traffic control, but for your business.
Mm.
And we are going to be taking off
Okay.
with insights from the book Flight Levels. It's a German book.
Yeah.
It's by Klaus Leopold and Siegfried Kaltenecker.
All right, cool. Well, this is interesting because, flight levels is a way to help us understand and visualize how work flows through an organization. And just like an airplane has different altitudes, a business operates at different levels of activity.
Yeah. So we're not talking about physical levels here, right? Like, what exactly are these flight levels in a business?
Yeah, you got it. Imagine flight level 1 as like the teams that are doing the hands-on work. So building the products, writing the code, delivering the service.
Okay.
It's like the operational heart of the business.
All right, that makes sense. So where does flight level 2 fit into all of this?
So flight level 2 is where things get interesting. This is the level where we coordinate multiple teams that are working towards a shared goal.
Okay.
So think of like product launches, marketing campaigns, anything that requires collaboration across different departments. And the real power of flight level 2 is its ability to break down those silos by visualizing the dependencies between teams.
Yeah.
So it becomes so much easier to spot bottlenecks and keep everyone on the same page.
So it's like having that bird's eye view of all the moving parts.
Yeah, exactly.
And how they connect to each other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we have flight level 3.
Okay.
Which is all about steering the whole organization towards its strategic vision. So this is where the big picture goals are set and where leaders make decisions that impact the entire business.
Okay. I'm starting to see how these levels work together.
Yeah.
But why should we care?
That's a good question.
What's the practical value of understanding this whole concept of flight levels?
Well, have you ever felt lost in a project? Like you're unsure how your individual tasks actually contribute to the overall goal.
Totally.
Yeah. So flight levels can provide that clarity and purpose for you. But connecting your work to the bigger picture. But it goes beyond just individual clarity, right?
Yeah.
The model also helps to bridge that gap between, those setting the strategies and those that are actually doing the work.
Yeah.
And by doing so, it prevents miscommunication and wasted effort.
That's a great point. So it really streamlines everything and makes sure everyone is moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
Now, the book mentions some intriguing details that I'm curious to unpack a little bit. For example, it emphasizes that faster work doesn't always equal better results.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, that's a really common misconception.
Yeah.
We often think that by working faster means we're being more productive. But that's not always the case.
Yeah.
The book uses an experiment called parallelogram building to illustrate this point. It shows that focusing on completing tasks rather than constantly starting new ones actually leads to much faster delivery times.
Okay, so can you give me an example of how that might apply to a real-world business scenario?
Absolutely. Imagine a software development team working on a new feature.
Okay.
Now, instead of having everyone jump on every single task at once, right?
Yeah.
Which can lead to confusion and delays.
Right.
They could actually focus on completing one task at a time and moving through that development process in a more streamlined way. So this is what we call like a pull system.
Okay.
Where work is pulled through the system only when there's capacity for it.
Yeah.
And it prevents a buildup of unfinished tasks, and it ensures a smoother workflow.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So it's like prioritizing quality over quantity.
Yeah.
And just ensuring that each step is done right before moving on to the next one.
Exactly. And the book reinforces this idea by advocating for visualizing workflows, preferably using visual boards. Whether they're physical or digital, these boards allow everyone to see the work that's in progress and understand how their individual tasks actually fit into that larger process.
This reminds me of something else that caught my eye in the book, and it was this term sadomaso boards.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty provocative term.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
It certainly grabs your attention.
It does.
The book uses this term to emphasize that effective flight level 2 boards should hurt a little.
Okay.
Because they expose inefficiencies and they force us to confront those problems head on.
So it's like holding up a mirror to the organization.
Exactly.
And forcing it to face its own flaws and shortcomings.
Precisely. The idea is that by visualizing these pain points, we can actually address them more effectively.
Okay.
And prevent them from becoming bigger issues down the line.
Yeah, that's a really interesting concept.
Yeah.
It's a powerful way to drive continuous improvement.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so it seems like there's a lot more to unpack here. But I'm curious to learn more about how flight levels are actually implemented within an organization.
Yeah, so one crucial aspect is the social side of change.
Okay.
The book dedicates a whole chapter to this, highlighting the need for leadership buy-in and a dedicated change team. It's not just about drawing lines on a board, right? It's about shifting mindsets and creating a culture that embraces agility.
Yeah. And what about the actual process of implementing flight levels? Like, where do you even begin?
So the book outlines 5 core activities of change design, and it starts with understanding the current situation.
Okay.
So it's like conducting a pre-flight check before takeoff, right? You need to know where you are, what's working, what's not working, and what pain points you're trying to address.
So it's about getting a clear picture of the terrain before you start charting your course.
Exactly. And then you move on to defining a clear focus for improvement. So what are the specific outcomes that you're aiming for? What problems are you trying to solve? This helps you tailor the implementation of flight levels to your organization's unique needs.
So it's like setting your destination.
Yeah.
And plotting your flight path.
Exactly.
For what comes next.
Well, just like a pilot needs a crew, you need a leadership coalition to champion this change.
Okay.
And this includes not just the executives, but also key influencers and change agents who can advocate for flight levels and help teams understand the benefits.
So it's like building a team of navigators
Yeah.
to guide the organization through this transformation.
That's a good analogy.
All right. So even with the best plan and the most supportive leadership, you still need to get everybody on board.
That's right.
So how do you get people excited about flight levels?
Well, it's all about communication and collaboration.
Okay.
You need to clearly explain the benefits of this new way of working, address any concerns, and involve people in the design and implementation process.
Okay.
And the book suggests using interactive workshops, visual tools, and storytelling to bring the concept of flight levels to life.
It's like giving everyone a chance to sit in the cockpit and see how flight levels can actually make their work lives better.
Exactly. And finally, the entire process needs to be agile, right? You start with small experiments, gather feedback, adapt, and continuously improve. It's not a rigid top-down approach, but rather an iterative journey of learning and growth.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
This is starting to paint a really compelling picture of how flight levels can work.
True.
But I'm curious to learn more about the practical details.
Okay.
Particularly at flight level 2, where you know that coordination magic happens.
Yeah.
So let's dive into that in our next segment.
Sounds good.
All right, see you then.
All right.
Okay, so we've established that flight level 2 is really where all the coordination magic happens.
Right.
But I'm curious, like, how does this actually work in practice?
So let's imagine you're part of a team responsible for launching a new product.
Okay.
Your flight level 2 system would need a way to visualize all the work involved and how it flows from one stage to the next.
Okay.
And the book calls these visual representations flight level 2 boards.
So we're essentially creating like a roadmap for the entire product launch.
That's a good way to put it.
Sure.
But instead of a static roadmap,
Yeah.
we're talking about a dynamic system that reflects the real-time progress of the work.
Okay.
And one common pattern for designing these boards is to organize them by what we call flight item types.
Flight item types. What exactly does that mean?
So think of them as the different categories of work that's involved in your launch.
Okay.
So for example, you might have flight item types for design tasks, development tasks, testing phases, marketing materials, and so on. Each type represents a distinct piece of work that needs to be completed.
So we're essentially breaking down the launch process into these manageable chunks of work?
Exactly. And then we map out the steps that each flight item type takes from start to finish.
Okay.
And this is called the flight route.
Okay.
So a design task might move from like initial concept to review to final approval, while a development task might go through coding, testing, and deployment stages.
So it sounds like we're creating this visual representation of the entire workflow.
That's the idea.
Showing how each piece of the puzzle fits together.
Yeah, and this visualization becomes incredibly powerful when you start layering in dependencies between teams.
Okay.
So let's say the marketing team can't finalize the product brochure until the development team provides the final product specifications.
Okay.
We would represent that dependency on the board so that everyone understands who needs what from whom and in what order.
Ah, so it's not just about like individual tasks, it's about seeing how they all interconnect.
Right. And this helps us to avoid bottlenecks and delays.
Okay.
Everyone can see what's blocking their work. And they can proactively communicate and collaborate to keep things moving.
Now, the book also stresses the importance of managing problems and roadblocks, and even suggests that we visualize them on the board.
Right.
Why is that? Wouldn't that just create negativity?
It might seem counterintuitive, but acknowledging problems is actually crucial for effective problem solving.
Okay.
By visualizing those problems, we bring them out in the open, and we make them transparent.
Okay.
This allows us to address them quickly and prevent them from escalating into bigger issues.
So it's about embracing the reality that problems are inevitable.
Yeah.
And just dealing with them head on.
Precisely. And this ties into another concept that the book introduces called blockade clustering.
Blockade clustering. That sounds intriguing. What is that?
It's a technique for analyzing roadblocks and identifying patterns.
Okay.
So let's say you notice that several delays are caused by waiting for approvals from a particular department. By clustering those blockades together, you can see that there's a systemic issue that needs to be addressed.
So it's like identifying a recurring problem that keeps tripping us up.
Exactly.
Wow.
And by understanding the root cause of these blockades, we can develop strategies to prevent them from happening again.
Okay. This all sounds very logical and efficient.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about how it connects to the parallelogram building experiment that we talked about earlier.
Okay, yeah.
How does that concept fit into Flight Level 2?
Well, that experiment highlights the importance of focusing on finishing tasks rather than starting too many at once.
Right.
And Flight Level 2 provides the tools and techniques for implementing that pull system in a real-world setting.
Can you give us an example of how that might work?
Yeah, one key tool is using WIP limits, or work-in-progress limits.
Okay.
And these limits set a maximum number of tasks that can be in progress at any given time for each team or workflow. So by limiting the amount of work in progress, we create focus and prevent teams from getting bogged down in multitasking.
So it's like ensuring that we're not spreading ourselves too thin.
Exactly.
And that we're fully completing each stage before moving on to the next.
Exactly. And the book outlines several other focus techniques, such as time boxes, sequencing work, and start policies.
Can you briefly explain those?
Sure. So time boxes are fixed periods for completing work, similar to sprints in Scrum.
Okay.
Sequencing work involves prioritizing tasks and working on them in a logical order, ensuring that dependencies are met. And start policies set rules for when new work can be started, preventing bottlenecks, and ensuring that teams have the necessary information and resources before they begin.
So it sounds like there are a lot of different tools available for creating a more focused and efficient workflow.
There are. And the key is to choose the techniques that best suit your organization's specific context. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
That makes sense. Now, I'm curious about how all of this ties into like the financial side of things.
Okay.
How does the flight levels model impact budgeting and resource allocation?
That's an important question. So the book actually challenges that traditional project-based budgeting approach.
Okay.
And advocates instead for budgeting for outcomes.
Outcomes over projects. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So traditionally, organizations allocate budgets to specific projects, but this can lead to a focus on delivering outputs rather than actually achieving the results that we want.
Yeah.
So the flight levels model suggests that it's more effective to allocate budgets to outcomes, which are the desired changes or benefits that you want to achieve.
So instead of funding a specific project,
right,
you're funding the desired result, which might involve multiple projects or approaches?
Exactly. This aligns financial resources with the desired outcomes, fostering a more value-driven approach. It also encourages flexibility and adaptability. If one approach isn't working, you can pivot and allocate resources to a more promising strategy without being constrained by those project-based budgets.
That's a really interesting concept.
Yeah.
It seems like Flight Level 2 is not only about coordinating work, but it's also about aligning resources and ensuring that we're investing in the right things.
Absolutely. And it's all part of creating a more agile and responsive organization that can adapt to changing market conditions and customer needs.
This has given us a lot to think about at like the team and project level.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, how does all of this fit into the broader organizational structure?
Okay.
We've talked about individual Flight Level 2 systems, but how do they all work together to achieve the overall goals of the company?
That's a great question. And it leads us to the concept of flight level system architecture, which we'll explore in our next segment.
So we've explored the operational level of Flight Level 1,
Right.
and we've talked about the coordination level, Flight Level 2. Now I'm curious to understand how these individual systems fit into the bigger picture of an organization.
Yeah, that's where flight level system architecture comes in.
Okay.
Think of it as a blueprint that shows how all the different flight level systems in an organization are interconnected.
So it's like a master plan for how all the different parts of the business work together.
Precisely. Just like a well-designed city
Okay.
has different districts, transportation systems, and utilities all working together.
Huh?
A successful organization needs its various flight level systems to be aligned and operating in sync.
Can you give us a concrete example of how this architecture might look in practice?
Let's go back to our drone company example.
Okay.
Imagine they have several different product lines, like drones for delivery, drones for photography, and drones for agriculture.
Okay.
Each of these product lines could have its own dedicated Flight Level 2 system.
Why would they need separate systems for each product line? Wouldn't that create more complexity?
It might seem counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but separating these systems can actually reduce complexity and increase efficiency.
Okay.
Each product line likely has its own unique set of challenges, teams, and workflows.
So it's about tailoring the coordination mechanisms to the specific needs of each product line.
Exactly. By having separate systems, we can ensure that each product line operates with the right level of focus and autonomy, allowing teams to make decisions quickly and adapt to changing market conditions.
Okay, that makes sense. But these separate systems can't exist in complete isolation, right?
Right.
There must be some way to connect them and ensure that they're all working towards the same overall goals.
You're right. That's where the concept of a portfolio board comes in.
Okay.
It acts as a central hub that oversees all the individual Flight Level 2 systems.
So it's like having a control tower that's monitoring all the different flight paths within the organization.
That's a great analogy.
Okay.
The portfolio board allows leadership to track the progress of different product lines, identify potential risks or dependencies, and make strategic decisions about resource allocation.
This all ties back to Flight Level 3, where the strategic vision is set.
Right.
How does that vision translate down to these interconnected Flight Level 2 systems and the portfolio board?
So Flight Level 3 sets the direction for the entire organization.
Okay.
It's where leadership defines the company's strategic goals and objectives.
Mm-hmm.
And those goals then cascade down to the lower levels,
Okay.
shaping the outcomes that each Flight Level 2 system is working towards.
Can you give us an example of how that might work?
Sure. Let's say the drone company's strategic goal is to become the leading provider of drone-based solutions for the agricultural industry.
Okay.
That goal would then inform the outcomes for the agricultural drone product line.
Okay.
Perhaps one outcome is to increase market share by 20%, while another outcome is to develop a new drone model with advanced crop monitoring capabilities.
So it's about breaking down the big picture vision into actionable objectives for each product line.
Exactly. And those objectives are then reflected on the individual Flight Level 2 boards, guiding the work of the teams.
But this communication shouldn't be just a one-way street, right? The teams working on the ground also need a way to provide feedback and insights to the higher levels.
Absolutely. The book emphasizes the importance of a feedback loop between the different flight levels. Teams on the ground have valuable insights into customer needs, market trends, and potential roadblocks.
Yeah.
That information needs to flow back up
to
inform strategic decision-making.
So it's not just about top-down control. It's about creating a collaborative environment where everyone has a voice and can contribute to the success of the organization.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And to understand how this information flows, the book introduces the concept of flight routes.
Okay, we talked about flight routes earlier in the context of like individual tasks.
Yeah.
How does that concept apply at the organizational level?
In a broader sense, flight routes represent the paths that work items take as they move through the different flight level systems.
So a flight route might show how a new product idea is conceived at Flight Level 3, then moves through development and testing at Flight Level 2, and finally gets launched and marketed at Flight Level 1.
Exactly. By mapping out these flight routes, we can visualize the flow of work across the entire organization, identify potential bottlenecks, and ensure that information and resources are flowing smoothly.
This has been incredibly insightful.
Good.
We've gone from the nuts and bolts of individual tasks all the way up to the big picture architecture of the entire organization.
Yeah, it's a powerful model.
It is. So what are some key points that you hope our listener will take away from this exploration of flight levels?
I think the most important takeaway is that flight levels offer a powerful framework for understanding and improving how work flows through an organization. It's about creating alignment, clarity, and a shared understanding of how everyone contributes to the overall goals.
And remember, it's not about blindly implementing a set of rules.
Right.
It's about understanding the principles behind flight levels and adapting them to your specific context.
Absolutely. It's about empowering teams, fostering collaboration, and creating a culture of continuous improvement.
Well, thank you for guiding us through this fascinating landscape of flight levels.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And I hope our listeners will continue to explore this model and see how it can be applied to their own work and organizations. So keep diving deeper, keep learning, and keep seeking those aha moments that elevate your understanding of the world. We'll see you on our next deep dive.
See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.